Confrontation. The overseer pulled out a chair to sit across from Colton. He tossed a tan folder on the table and nodded to it. Colton flipped through the pictures of guns and other weapons, environmental suits, a helicopter, and profiles of some people he knew, including one of himself. "What do you want, Max?" Colton asked. "Siri?" The overseer ignored the question. "Open the blinds." "Opening blinds," a feminine robotic voice responded. Light peeked through the wall to the left of them as it split into rectangular horizontal panels. The panels slid into the roof, revealing a window. The world was a barren wasteland, with the closest visible structures withered and in ruin. "Exploration," the overseer said, gesturing toward the window. "Exploration? My teams have already searched many of the old buildings. There is nothing out there to explore, Max. Everything is dead, except for those damn roaches. We need to explore the rock." "Get out," Colton said. He closed the folder, threw it back on the table, and crossed his arms. "Come on, Colt. Get out before I throw you out." The overseer sighed. "Think about Maria and the others. They would have—" "Shut up!" Colton slammed his hands on the table. "Don't you ever say her name." "Colton, for what happened that day I am sorry," the overseer said. "No, you're not. They knew the risk going in. They all volunteered." Colton walked away from the table to stand by the window. He stared out at the barren land, thinking about simpler times he would have had with Maria. No helicopter is made it past the storm wall. It's a suicide mission then. It's a suicide mission now. Nothing's changed. Did you even look at the files? We have better equipment and technology. I have the very best here ready to go. But I need your leadership. You know it's been almost 200 years since the rock destroyed everything. Don't let your anger be the reason we won't have a future." "What?" "The fusion core is dying, and we do not have enough raw materials to sustain it, or build a new one. Alea says at its current degradation, we may have 3 years. But once it goes, so does our clean water and our air. Then the radiation will eat our bodies until we are all dead." "Why don't you just tell everyone?" Colton asked. "And start a panic? No way. Alea says if we can get to the rock, there may be some minerals or materials we can bring back and test and synthesize. I need you on this, Colton." Colton walked back to the table, then glanced at a picture on the counter across from the room. It was a worn picture of a tall, balding man cuddling a brown-skinned woman with curly brown hair and green eyes. Colton and Maria. He sighed, then picked up the files. "I'll do it, but under one condition," he said. "Anything you want, you name it," the overseer said. "You're coming too." Part 2. The Flight. It took 2 weeks to prepare for the trip, but they were finally in the air. They traveled across thousands of miles of barren land. The world was dry and desolate, full of lifeless valleys. They passed over ruined stones and metal monuments, burned out rusted shells of old vehicles and aircrafts, and fields of charred tree stumps, remnants of the old world. They were a squad of 7 people. Colton was the team leader. Maxwell Belafonte, the most recent successor of the title of overseer, the person in charge of running the compound. Adriana Chavez, a skilled roach hunter. Will Wilson, arms specialist. C. Jackson, their heavy gunner. Alea Diamond, maintenance personnel. and Johnny, the pilot. Thousands of feet above the ground, Colton marveled at the lifeless world. It was beautiful somehow. His thoughts were on the mission, and he began to second-guess why he agreed to come. Then he thought about Maria. "Colton," the pilot said. His voice came through the headsets everyone was wearing. "Yeah," Colton said. "Can you imagine what the world looked like before the rock hit? Green trees, colorful plants, different animals, and rain that isn't trying to burn your skin off? It must have been something nice. That's what all the old folks used to say." "Why do we need all this ammunition? We never needed this much to kill roaches," Chavez asked. "Ask him," Colton said, pointing to the overseer. "The rock is unknown terrain. We don't know what we might encounter once we get there. It's better to be prepared," the overseer said. "Assuming we make it through the storm wall and don't crash in a fiery death," Colton said. "Don't worry, Colton," the pilot said. "I've flown through all types of hell in this barren. We'll make it through." "I'm sure the last group to attempt thought the same thing," Colton said, glaring at the overseer. Everyone went silent, except for the pilot, who mumbled something under his breath. Colton knew he was their best warrior. He led hunting packs to go out for roach meat. Bastards were hard to kill, but he became an expert at it. So if they did run into any roaches or anything else, he could rely on his experience. Flying into the storm wall was different. You can shoot a roach, but you can't shoot the wind. Then the helicopter wobbled as they got closer to the storm wall. A few hundred yards away, the storm wall was the perpetual dust storm that surrounded the rock. The winds curved around the rock at dangerous speeds, hurling all kinds of debris within it. In all the years Colton had lived, nothing or no one has ever made it through. Lightning blasted in long and bright crackling strands before fading away. Everyone braced for impact as they approached. "I'm pushing her through, everybody. Hold on to something," the pilot said. The helicopter rattled under the force of the wind, and the dust swept through in a wave. It was so thick that Colton couldn't see in front of him. The howl of the storm was like that of 1,000 screeching roaches, and the helicopter shook violently, engulfed by the pressure of the winds. Colton felt the dust ripping at his body through his Evo suit and face mask. Then, after what seemed like an eternity, the shaking stopped, and they were flying more smoothly. Colton opened his eyes to see dark clouds booming in the sky above. Directly in front of them was a massive mountain. It went on for what had to be thousands of miles, dwarfing their small helicopter. Colton felt small, like the bead of sweat that trickled down his forehead. The mountain was mostly ragged edges with gigantic cliffs and steep crevices. It was larger than they had expected. "Holy shit," someone said. Colton didn't want to believe it, but this mountain was the rock. Part 3. Enter the Rock. The rock was surrounded by a crater of immense jagged slopes hundreds of feet high. There was nowhere to land there, so the pilot settled for a clearing near the top of the rock to land. This area wasn't as rough as the other areas. Jackson and Wilson were first out of the helicopter. They grabbed all the technical equipment, temperature gauges, vials, capsules, and everything else that was research-related. The pilot supplied everyone with their weapons, even handing them a couple of grenades. "Be careful with these," he said. "One wrong move and boom!" The surface shook beneath. Everyone froze and after a moment continued out of the helicopter. Colton was the last out. He noticed that the rock felt like a sponge, sinking in with every step. He moved on to checking everyone's face mask. Flying through the storm wall should have caused cracks or dents, but Colton found none. With the air toxicity and high radiation levels, he had to make sure everyone was safe. Besides, the Evo suits and face masks weren't of the best quality, as the overseer had promised. "Check that out," Alea pointed at the sky. Lightning flashed in crackling bolts through black and orange clouds over their heads. The thunder that followed shook them.
This was way different than the storms we see back home.
Yeah, Colton said. It's hundreds of years of pure ugly.
I can't believe we're the first people to stand on this thing that destroyed the world, Chavez said.
The world is not destroyed. Not yet, the overseer said. He gestured for everyone to come to him. They gathered in a circle just a few feet away from the helicopter. Siri, link up, he said.
Security, interface, and response intelligence activated,
a feminine robotic voice responded. Siri, give us a heads-up display.
Heads-up display activated,
she responded. I can't believe it's working, the overseer said, as everyone's heart rate appeared in green next to their initials on the bottom left of the corner of their face mask. Siri will monitor our heart rate and health conditions throughout our Evo suits. If anyone gets hurt, one of our face masks cracks or breaks, or if there is a tear in one of our suits, we'll all know. Well, let's get what we need and go home, and keep your guns at the ready. We have no idea what's out here, Colton said. Johnny, you take point. Max, you're with me.
Maybe we'll get lucky and not run into anything, Alea said.
Colton gestured with 2 fingers for them to start walking, when the surface trembled beneath them and became unsteady. It collapsed beneath their feet, and they fell through. Part 4. The Descent. They fell hard. Colton lay there for a moment, in agonizing pain, gazing back up at the hole they had fallen through. Wilson was the first to his feet, pouring fragments of glass and metal from out of the cache he was carrying. Damn, he said. That fall broke most of our equipment. Colton struggled to get up, dusting himself off and doing his best to ignore the pain in his neck and back. He helped Chavez and Jackson get up, as Wilson helped Alea and the overseer.
That was lovely,
Chavez said, checking her shotgun for damages. Let's take whatever equipment we can salvage. Siri can analyze them while we look for a way out of here, the overseer said. Colton shook off the ringing in his ears and took a good look at their surroundings. The dark gray, cave-like insides of the rock's walls were grimy and sharp, with bits of dark orange minerals within them.
I need to get a sample of this sediment,
Alea said, willing herself to the wall and scraping some into one of the vials that weren't broken. She winced with every move. Colton noticed that the pilot's heart rate went from green to orange. Everyone seeing this? Colton asked. Over here, the pilot said. They all turned, finding him crushed beneath a massive rock from the waist down. My legs, he groaned, trying to free himself. Jackson and Colton hurried to lift. Wilson pulled him from under it as soon as they leveraged it up. They dragged and propped the pilot up against a wall. I've never been grounded before, he said, coughing up blood through a failed laugh. I guess there's a first time for everything. They left the pilot for a moment to regroup. I can give him a shot of the Psycho X to relieve the pain, but if we don't get headed back, he's not going to make it, Wilson explained. I agree, said Colton. Everyone nodded in approval. Give him the shot, the overseer said. It should last until we come back with the samples. He grabbed the equipment and headed for a random tunnel. We're not leaving him, Colton said, slapping the equipment from the overseer's hands. We have a mission, which is already compromised. We are getting him, and we are getting the fuck out of here. We can't put the life of one person over the life of everyone else in the compound. The pilot screamed, and their attention turned back to him. At the moment when Colton and the overseer were arguing, the pilot became engulfed by a black, slimy substance. Wilson went over to check on him, but the black goo hissed as he got near it. Is that shit alive? Colton said as he pulled out his pistol. The pilot tried to free himself, but the more he moved, the faster it covered him. Within minutes, it completely covered him until all that was left was a black mound. They watched in horror as his vitals turned from orange to red. The black creature's oily exterior hardened. Colton fired shots at it, but they bounced off. Colton put his gun away, then turned to the overseer and slammed him against the wall. "You bastard," Colton said. "His death is on your hands." Wilson and Jackson grabbed Colton and pulled him off the overseer. As they tried to get Colton to calm down, the black creature began to move again. Colton shook them off his arms, and everyone took a step back. The cocoon-like shell began to break. Cracks started to form in it before it began to turn into a slimy substance again. Then it took on the shape of a man. "Johnny?" Chavez said, taking a step forward. Where the pilot's face should be was just black goo. It rippled like tiny waves from the center outward. "How was he standing?" Wilson asked. The creature roared at them. They pulled their weapons and unloaded on it. The cave filled with the sounds of gunfire, but the creature absorbed the bullets into its gooey black body. Colton signaled with his hand, and they stopped firing. They waited. The creature's hands melded together, forming long blades. Then it charged at them. They all ran, but in different directions, maneuvering through the random corridors of the rock without thinking. There were many dark corners and tunnels. It was like a maze. Colton tried to process what happened to the pilot, but let his guard down when he was angry and became distracted. But Colton didn't see the ledge until it was too late. Part 5. Cold Wave. Colton barreled down the side of the rugged rocky steep onto a jagged stone. He was almost to his feet when Alea and Chavez plowed right into him. He fought through the pain and helped them up. "Thanks, boss," Chavez said. Colton nodded. "Where are the others?" "They were right behind us," Alea said. "Do you think it got them?" "I hope not," he said, tapping on his face mask. Only his, Alea, and Chavez's vitals were green. Everyone else's had disappeared from the screen. "Their vitals aren't showing anymore. It might be we're out of range. Regardless, keep your guns ready." Colton took the lead. The light from his face mask lit the way through the winding tunnels. Everything happened so fast. One moment they were landing, then next they fell through. Now some creature had killed the pilot and chased them even deeper into the rock. Colton thought about Maria and her team, and if they had made it this far into the rock. Had she been killed by a creature like that? Alea's hand on his shoulder pulled him out of his thoughts. She pointed to the ceiling, and he had just noticed that he had led them into a massive dome-shaped cavern. The temperature was much lower than where they started, as the cold air chilled their breaths, and layers of frost covered the walls. "Look at this place," Alea said. She pulled out a small device to take samples. "There's condensation in here. That means there is water." Glowing orange minerals embedded in the rock walls provided the cavern with a light glow. Some of the walls were covered with writings and symbols, layered in multiple colors, displaying strange images. Colton noticed something bizarre about the images. "Come look at this," he said. He pointed to a series of black images that went from an S-like shape to a straight line, to a circle, then to a figure resembling a man. "Could it be that thing that attacked us?" he said, "going from a liquid to solid rock, then—" "To a man?" Alea said. Colton nodded. Then Chavez's vitals went from green to orange. "Guys," she whispered, and when Colton and Alea turned around, a giant hand covered her head and neck. She looked frozen. A large, pale, white creature snapped her neck and threw her body across the cavern. It roared, attacking Colton and Alea. They fired at it, but the bullets bounced off the creature as if they were hitting a concrete wall. "What do we do?" Alea said as she ran for an exit. The creature caught up to her, sending her crashing into the wall with a hard slap. The beast turned to Colton, who still fired shots at it. The creature rushed him. Colton ducked, rolling under the creature's massive legs to get behind it. He made it to Chavez's body and grabbed her shotgun. The beast grabbed Colton by the leg and flung him across the room. It stalked and loomed over Colton. He shivered as the creature got closer to him. It snarled at him. It was close enough for Colton to see that its face was mushy. Still gripping the shotgun, Colton fought through the numbing pain overtaking his limbs and fired. The creature let out a horrid screech as green goo and meat chunks splattered in all directions. It stumbled backward, falling to a knee. Colton fired more rounds into its face, and gun sounds echoed throughout the cave. "Colton!" Alea called, snapping him out of his kill rage. "Are you okay?" he said, reaching out a hand to help her stand.
"I think so," she said.
"Whatever that thing is, it killed Chavez. We need to get out of here before we run into more of these things." Part 6. Blood and Bone. Max plunged down the side of a cave wall like a boulder falling off a mountain cliff. When he finally hit solid ground, despite the pain that was vibrating through his body, he pulled out his pistol. He scanned his immediate surroundings, aiming with shaky hands behind him, then quickly to the left and right. Jackson got up slothfully and pushed Max's gun toward the ground. "Be careful with that thing," Jackson said. "I think we lost it." Max shivered as fear, along with an overwhelming amount of guilt, began to creep its way into him. It was his idea to come to this place, and now they would probably die here. "What was that thing?" Wilson asked, scanning the perimeter of their surroundings with his rifle. Max had never even left the compound before now, but Jackson and Wilson were hunters. They had experience in bearing that he didn't. They could remain calm in intense situations. He had to grab his hand to keep it from shaking. He didn't even want to come into this mission, but it was the only way to get Colton to agree. Jackson yanked him out of his thoughts. "You need to start explaining things," Jackson said. "Jackson, we should keep moving," Wilson said, pointing towards the tunnel. "We need to regroup with the others." "Move," Jackson said. He pushed Max to the wall ahead of him. He was probably just as mad as Colton. Johnny was dead, and he had been one of them, a hunter. Max hadn't known the man as well as they had. Now he was dead. They traveled through the dark tunnels, light orange light coming from the minerals defined in the walls. They had only walked a few meters when they reached the next cavern. It was large and had a cylindrical shape. Stone steps spiraled to the top, which was several meters high. The intersecting layers seemed to lead to openings to more tunnels and caves. "These steps look man-made," Wilson said. The vitals of Colton, Alea, and Chavez had disappeared from their face masks. "Siri, locate the others," Max said. He took a seat on the bottom stone step to relax from the pain he was enduring. "Out of range," the robotic feminine voice said. "So, Mr. Overseer, are you going to clue us in on what's going on?" Jackson asked. Max could hear the anger in his voice. "I sent a team out to investigate the rock before," Max said. "We know," Wilson interrupted. "Colton's girl was on that team, right?" "Yes, but we never heard back from them, so we assume they never made it through the storm wall. They were declared killed in action." "So you bet our lives on the off chance we make it through?" Jackson said. "I was much younger then, and we have better equipment now," Max said. "With the current state of the compound, we had to try. Plus, I think they did make it through." "But you just said," Wilson started. "I know what I said," Max responded. "Not all. I think some. Or maybe just one made it through." "And why do you think that?" Wilson asked. "Because we received a distress signal." "What was in the distress signal?" Jackson asked. "A message. Beware the Téreta." "What the fuck is a whatever it was you just said," Wilson said. Jackson yanked Max the same way Colton had earlier, lifting him. "You knew there was creatures in here and you didn't warn us?" "Does Colton know?" Jackson demanded. "Know what?" Max groaned. Jackson plopped Max into the stone steps. "Does he know any of the stuff you just told us?" "Why do you think he came?" Max said. A lie in the form of a question to redirect Jackson's anger. A roar cut through the cave, and before any of them could respond, something flew past them. A hulking and pale gray creature with rock-like skin stood at the top of the steps. Its body and face were covered in bones with blood and meat dripping from them. and in its hand it carried a large bone that was shaped into a blade. Something stuck in the wall behind them caught Max's eye. It was 3 sharpened bones tied together. He felt a hand tug on his shoulder and turned as Jackson pulled him into the tunnel. He looked back to see Wilson's head falling from his body. The creature's weapon had sliced it off. Max shuddered as he could only watch as the creature jumped down, crushing Wilson's corpse under its feet. "Run!" Part 7. Reunion. Colton and Alea were navigating their way through the dark tunnels when the roof above them collapsed. Among the rubble were 2 familiar bodies. "Jackson! Max!" Colton shouted. "Not now," Jackson said. "Just run!" The roars of a creature echoed all around them. A hulking, pale creature crashed through the cave ceiling after Jackson and the overseer. It had stone-like skin draped in bones as armor. "Brace yourselves!" Colton flung a grenade. He was caught by the blast right when it exploded in the creature's face. A blinding light flashed through the tunnels. The force of a flashbang was enough to cause more of the tunnel to cave in. Someone pulled Colton to his feet, wrapping his arm around them. When the ringing in his ears and throbbing in his head relaxed, his vision returned. When he opened his eyes, he thought it was Maria carrying him. Her curly brown hair, soft green eyes, full lips, and light brown skin. He shook his head, and when he looked again, it was Alea. "Thanks," Colton said. He moved off her and tried to regain his composure. "I got it from here." He walked up to Jackson, who had taken point. "I think we lost it. That thing attacked us when we got separated. It killed Wilson," Jackson said. His voice was unusually cold. "Where's Chavez?" Jackson asked. Colton swallowed. "We were attacked too," he said. "She didn't make it." "Then how did you and Alea get away?" "I shot it in the face with this." Colton held up Chavez's shotgun. "Duly noted," Jackson said. They walked in silence through the winding tunnels and corridors, lost as they tried to find their way back to the surface. After a few minutes, Alea called for them to stop. "Do you hear that?" she said. "Hear what?" Jackson asked. "It sounds like—" Alea ran into a random direction. "It's coming from over here." "Alea, wait," Colton said, but he could hear something as he followed her. It got louder as they drew nearer to it. They turned a sharp corner into another cavern, and there it was. A stream that flowed rapidly in one direction. Its bright red hue was like the evening sun illuminating the cave walls. Waves crashed against the stones, and it had to be hundreds of meters wide. "It's so beautiful," Alea said, falling to her knees to get a closer look. "I don't believe it," the overseer said. "It's water?" "I need to get samples," Alea said. She was about to stick her hand in when Jackson pulled her back. "Wait," he said. "It could be toxic." "Siri, run an analysis on this liquid. Check for harmful elements," the overseer said. "Performing analysis," the robotic feminine voice responded. Colton leaned against the cave wall, watching Alea and the overseer get their samples when Jackson approached him. "I don't think we're getting out of here alive," he said low enough so the others couldn't hear. "We just need to make it back to the surface," Colton said. "You should have warned us to be ready before we came here," Jackson said. "I expect Max to be slime, but you? What are you talking about? I'm as lost here as you," Colton said, his anger boiling up inside of him. "Don't bullshit, Colton. Max told me about the distress beacon. You only came here to see if your beloved Maria would still be alive. Let me guess. You want to go down fighting these Téreta at the expense of the rest of us." A right hook knocked Jackson to the floor. It had happened so fast Colton didn't realize what he had done until he saw Jackson on the floor. Jackson's face mask cracked where Colton's fist connected. Colton said as he stretched out a hand to help Jackson up. Jackson slapped Colton's hand away. They both looked to the overseer who had been watching them the whole time. Colton marched to him. "Now, wait a minute," the overseer said, tripping over his own feet before stumbling and falling on his butt. Colton stopped when something creeped out of the shadows on the other side of the red stream. Alea slid the vials into a suit pocket and started backing away from the ruby-colored water. Two four-legged beasts appeared on the other side. With no visible eyes, the beasts snarled and snapped with gaping mouths filled with many blood-stained fangs. Their massive ebony frames stood on thick legs that ended in paws with sharp claws. Behind them stood a massive, pale gray creature with blood-spattered bones draped around its body and face like armor. Part 8. The Chase. The creature barked something and the two ferocious four-legged beasts jumped in the crimson stream. Colton, Alea, and the Overseer ran, but Jackson loaded his minigun. "Come on!" Colton yanked Jackson by the suit, but he shrugged it off. "I'm staying here." He turned to face the beast propping the six-barrel gun on a large stone. "I'll hold him off." Colton shivered and placed a hand on Jackson's shoulder. "Goodbye," he said. The two four-legged beasts erupted from the Scarlet River, rabid and terrifying, and Colton sprinted to catch up with the other two. The high-pitched whirl of the Gatling gun became faint the further he ran. He followed Alea and the Overseer into a cylindrical chasm aligned with spiraling steps that led downward hundreds of meters to many intersecting tunnels and caverns. Alea stopped at the edge before nearly falling off. "Which way?" she asked. "Just go," the Overseer said, pushing past her to run down the spiraling steps. She and Colton followed. They were halfway down when Jackson's vitals became out of range. One of the four-legged beasts appeared above them. They were stopped in their tracks when it leaped across the chasm, crashing in front of them. It showed its blood-stained fangs as it snarled at them, crouching towards the ground, taking slow, stalking steps. Colton stood between the beast and the others. "You try to find a way out of here," he said. Claws forward, the beast pounced. "Colton!" Alea screamed. Colton and the beast plummeted to the bottom and hit the ground hard. Fighting through the pain, Colton stood and pulled out his last grenade. The four-legged beast stalked him. It crouched, then Colton tossed the grenade into its snarling fangs as the beast pounced on him. He screamed as it dug its claws into his shoulders. It went to bite his head off when an explosion went off in its stomach. Green guts and gray smoke spewed from its mouth as it plopped dead on top of him. It was a struggle for Colton to wiggle from underneath its dead carcass. "Filthy beast," he said as he spit blood from his mouth. The green goo combined with the cracks in his face mask made it impossible for him to see. He popped the latchets. They hissed as smoke rose from different parts. He pulled off the whole helmet and tossed it to the ground, taking in one deep breath. He looked up, wondering how far Alea and the Overseer were. Those thoughts vanished as something landed behind him. He turned to find a giant, pale gray creature with blood-spattered, meaty bones draped around its body and face like armor. Part 9. Face Off. Colton popped off his helmet and threw it to the ground. He sat on top of the four-legged beast and took a deep breath. Still alive, he thought. He reloaded his last clip and patted himself for more grenades, but there were none. He scanned the area for Chavez's shotgun, but it was nowhere in sight. He looked up, wondering how far Alea and the Overseer were. Then something landed behind him. He turned to find a giant, pale gray creature with blood-splattered, meaty bones draped around his body and face like armor. It was the same creature from the red stream. The bones covering the creature's face were cracked. In one hand it carried a large bone that was sharpened at one end, and in the other it carried Jackson's severed head. The creature tossed the head to his feet and growled. Shocked, Colton barely ducked as it swung for his head. Colton fired a couple shots. They cracked more of its bone mask, but it didn't hit the mushy face behind. It threw something at Colton, which he sidestepped. A smaller weapon made of 3 sharpened bones tied together. The creature threw another one, catching Colton in the same shoulder the four-legged beast had stabbed him with its claw. Colton cried out in pain as the impact knocked him into the wall. Colton bolted for the steps, firing a couple more shots. The creature yanked him by the leg, slamming him into the cave floor. "Fuck!" he cursed, coughing up blood. He struggled to his feet, and before he could react, the creature kicked him. He slammed into the wall halfway across the cave. Colton gasped, pain igniting in his ribs. He rolled over on his back, trying to see through blurry eyes as blood spewed from his mouth. He screamed as the creature dug his bone blade into his shoulder. It let out a howling roar as it hoisted Colton upon its blade. It jammed the blade into the cave wall, pinning Colton against it, then turned to retrieve its other weapons. Colton slipped in and out of consciousness. For a moment, he was back in the compound, getting a massage from Maria. But when he opened his eyes, the creature was making his way back to him. His arms were numb, but he felt something in his hand. The creature came in close to kill its prey, putting one of its 3-boned weapons up to Colton's throat. It snarled, getting so close that Colton could feel its breath. Through blurred vision, Colton spotted a hole in the creature's bone mask. He wedged his pistol in between and fired. Green meat chunks and goo spread in all directions as the creature's brain exploded from the back of its skull. It dropped to the ground dead. Colton fought through the pain as he pulled the large bone blade from his shoulder. He sat on top of the dead thing, spitting out blood and mucus. He bandaged the hole in his shoulder, gripping his ribs, fighting the urge to pass out. He checked the pistol. Only a few shots left. Then headed up the spiraling stone steps. Part 9. Part 10. Lost. Colton had to drag himself up the steps to where he had been knocked off. He went through an adjacent corridor, assuming that Alea and the overseer headed the same way. He leaned against the walls for support as his legs wobbled with every step. Keep going. Just keep going, he told himself. If another one of these creatures were to attack, he'd be a goner. The tunnels of the rock seemed even darker without the assistance of the face mask. Then he arrived at a split that led to 2 tunnels leading in different directions. He took a step forward, kicking something that clattered on the ground. Barely visible against the rocky floor was a syringe filled with a black liquid labeled Psycho X. He couldn't believe that it was there. Even after he shook his head and rubbed his eyes, it was still there. It was a blessing. He grabbed it, held it up to get a better look at it, and then kissed it. Alea and the overseer must have left it here for him. Or could it be the same one they were going to use on the pilot? How did it get here, he wondered, but didn't dwell on it. He stuck the needle into his arm and took a deep breath as his pain began to numb, his heart rate sped up, and his energy came back. Feeling revitalized, he continued through one of the tunnels. "Alea! Max!" he called, but no one answered. He searched through the caverns for several minutes, but there were no other signs of them. Then he arrived at a weird cave at the end of the tunnel. As he walked into the cave, it was illuminated by pillars of fire, keeping it hot inside. Colton felt the Psycho X sweating out his system. He saw a massive shadow approaching in the darkness, so he hid behind one of the fire pillars. A massive brown creature with stone-like skin stalked into the cave. It had to be at least 3 times larger than the others. It had long spikes protruding out of its shoulders that protected its fleshy face, and tentacles slithering in, out, and around the body. Colton was in no shape to fight the behemoth, so he waited for it to pass. As it made its way through the cave, unaffected by the heat, Colton veered to its blind side. He was almost out of the cave when he came across a stone table structure. A person was bound to it by the same slithering tentacles that were part of the monster. "Colton?" the overseer cried out. "Max, how did you get like this?" Colton said. "Where's Alea?" The overseer nodded upwards. Colton looked up to find Alea hanging upside down from the roof of the cave. Her body was wrapped in tentacles and her face had been seared to the bone. "Colton," the overseer cried, "I'm so sorry. I... The overseer tried to move, but the tentacles tightened, pinning him to the stone. "Max, I'm going to get you out of here. Hold on." "No, don't," the overseer warned, but Colton already had his knife and cut at the tentacles. The tentacles vibrated and the creature stopped immediately. It turned to Colton, locking his eyes on him, and roared. The creature stuck its hand out towards Colton, and tentacles burst from its body. They slithered in the air and left him no choice but to leave the overseer behind. Colton ran. Tentacles came from everywhere, bursting through the tunnel walls, from the cave ceiling, and even from underneath his feet. They stopped him at every twist and turn, forcing him to change directions. He ignored the incoming pain in his ribs and fought to keep his legs moving, sprinting at full speed as the Psycho X began to wear off. He made a wrong turn somewhere, arriving at a point where he had to climb upward. With all his injuries, the climb was that more enduring. Tentacles encroached on him, but he made it to another tunnel. He looked down, spotting the gigantic beast below. He ran down a corridor, taking every twist and turn he could, hoping to get away. When he stopped for a breather, as the tentacles were no longer behind, a faceless black creature appeared in front of him. He fired the last of his bullets at it, but they did nothing, falling uselessly to the ground. The black creature's hands melded into blades. It roared, slashing at Colton, but he dodged it and got behind the beast. It raised its blades in the air to strike again when a tentacle burst through its chest. It let out a horrid screech as tentacles started to burst through it. The black creature then changed its form, turning into a liquid substance and falling to the floor. Colton flinched at the sight of the pilot's lifeless body, only held up by the tentacles that protruded through it. The tentacles pulled the pilot into the darkness. A roar followed. The black liquid creature sluggishly headed for Colton. He threw his gun at it and then continued running. He ran into a cave that had no exit, a dead end. There was something eerily familiar about this cave. An empty cache with broken equipment lay turned over on the ground. Bullets and shell casings were scattered about, and there was a large amount of debris. He looked up. There was a hole in the cave roof that stretched to the surface. He could see the black, red, and orange clouds that covered the sky. He fell to his knees, unable to fight off the pain anymore, looking up through the hole. "Maria, I love you," he said. A sharp pain pierced through his back and out from his chest. He looked down, and a tentacle protruded from his body. All went black.